Hello guys, welcome back. And in previous video we saw how we can create a view component, and we know that how we are going to use that anywhere in the UI component as well as in the page, right? So now in this video we are going to create a couple of more customizable component which we will be using across our application. So without talking much, let's go into code. And this time what I'm going to create is I'm going to create an app button, and again that is going to be a wrapper of ion input component, right? So let me first create ion input component here, not ion input component, but we can name it as a app input. We can say, see, again this is going to be a naming convention, and then if you want to follow some other naming convention, of course you are free to follow that. You just try with this different naming convention and see if it works. All right, so let me create this file, view file, and we all know that very first thing what we are going to do with this view file is we are going to say our design is going to be inside template, right? That's what we learned in previous video. So here first, and then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put a script as well, because I'm going to use ion input component, right? When we are going to talk about view Ionic is having one input element, that is ion input, and how we can use that we'll see that here. So very first thing what I'm going to do here is I'm going to name this component, and for that we need to do export default, right? Why we are doing this? Since it will be a component, we should be able to use it anywhere in the program. That is nothing but it is going to be another component, and then of course page. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this name for this component app input, so that we can recognize at certain point of time, like, okay, this component name is app input. For that we are going to put name. This is completely optional. If you guys want to omit this, you can omit this, but then in terms of debugging it is going to be hard to know which component exactly this is. Okay, so here what I'm going to do is I'm going to say components. I need component to register on this view instance. So how we are going to do that, we saw that while we creating app button, right? So if you don't see that lecture, please go back to app button lecture, where we created a very basic app button, which is of course a wrapper on view Ionic button. So that's a different story, but in this video we are going to again do the same kind of functionality but with app input, right? So here what I'm going to say is we need ion input, right? So as soon as you will type ion input, you will get a suggestion to import this ion input. I'll just click enter. You can see here it is automatically imported, right? So for that what I'm going to do here next is I'm just going to use this ion input. And how we can do that, of course we know that whenever we are dealing with the component, we can follow the kebab casing. That is a recommended way of using the component, or else you can if you want you can use in the same way, in the same Pascal casing. This is called Pascal casing, and this is known as the snake casing, kebab casing. There's couple more types like snake casing and camel casing. You can try with that and then see if it works. So here what I'm going to say is, okay, close this tag. Fine. Now here we are going to bind couple of properties to this ion input, so that it should work in expected way, the way we want. So very first thing what I'm going to bind here is I'm going to say, okay, there should be a reference attached to this input, and what using this reference later point of time in the program, if we want to access this a specific element, ion element, right, ion input element, we should be able to call this input, and then we will have all those access of this ion input. We'll see that in action. So for now I just assign this reference equals to input, and then next thing is this is going to be of some type. So what I'm going to say here is, okay, this is going to be of type dynamic. Why dynamic? Because since we are going to use this component from somewhere, right, on some page or other component, then from there itself we should be able to say, like, okay, this input should be of type text, this input should be of type email, or this input should be of type password, right? For that we need to take the data, we need to accept the data in the props, right? What is props? We already know that while we created app button component. Props is nothing but it is a way of passing data from parent to child. All right, so then I'm going to say, and what does this colon actually mean? This colon is basically short notation of vbind. So in Vue.js, we are going to, if we want to bind some property, bind some value to a specific element, we can do that, of course. And how we can do that is we can use v-bind directive is there. So we have a lot of Vue directive in Vue.js, and how we can use that, we'll see that here. So instead of vbind, I'm just going to type colon, since it will work in same way. We don't have to use vbind actually. And one more thing is interesting about this vbind is it is a single way binding. So data will always be single data will be changing, and then it will reflect in the input. But if input changes, those data won't be reflected back to the properties. Okay, that is called single way binding. All right. So now since we talk about directive, if you don't know what is directive is a certain attribute, you can say, in Vue.js, using which we can perform certain functionality on template, or you can say design. So we have a lot of Vue directive in Vue.js, and vif is one of the type, vlc, v4, vbind, vmodel. There are a lot more. So if you want to dig deep inside that, you can go on Vue documentation page, and you can read about the custom directive, how you can create a custom directive. And if you want, you can read about all those directives which is inbuilt or already they are present in the Vue.js. So this time I'm going to say I'm going to bind label. So I'm just going to bind label over here. It should be like this. So label is nothing. We are going to say, okay, this input is going, there should be a text displaying, so that we can understand, like, okay, this input is email, or this input is for password. So for that we are going to use label, and then I'm going to use label placement, right? All right. So label placement, it is going to be label position. I'm going to bind it, and you don't have to worry about now. Maybe you have confused why we are going to use this and all, right? So very basic thing you need to understand is if we are going to use any of the component in Vue.js, right, or we are creating any component, of course, from the parent to child, if you want to send some data, if you want to pass some data, right? So what we can do is we need to pass those data in props. Okay, same thing we are doing here. This is one of the component, which is of course an Ionic component. And if we want to send some data to this component, how we can do that? Of course, we are going to use props for that. So this Ionic Vue Ion input element is one of the component, and it is expecting data in this as a props of these many props. Basically, we are defining over here. There can be many more, and you are free to play with all those props, and you can see what is your expectation and what you want to achieve. So all those you can do with this Ion input. So I hope that is clear why we are doing this, right? Next, what I'm going to do here is I need placeholder. So I'm going to bind the placeholder value as well. Placeholder, right? And next thing what I need is for example, I need counter as well. So I'll say counter. All right. And next what I need is I need maximum length over here. You are free to play with any of the props value. All right. So here it should be dynamic. We are not going to assign any static value. Why we are going to make it dynamic? Because it should be very customizable. It should totally depend on what we are going to inject from outside when we are going to use it. Inject here is nothing but the props which we are going to pass from where we are going to use this particular component. I hope I'm clear. And then maximum length, I'm going to say max length. Similarly, it will go like min length. So I'll type here as min length, and then finally we need a couple of more props over here, and for that what I'm going to use it, I'm going to say disable should also be there, so that we can make this input disabled at any point of time when we want based on certain condition. So disabled will be there, and in this case I'm going to use disabled property, and then we have class, we should be able to bind class dynamically as well. In this, I am going to bind style class, all right, property name. And then we'll have the default value also. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the value in the input props, and we have couple of more props over there which we can assign debounce. Of course, debounce is one of, so what debounce will do, debounce is one concept in JavaScript. Basically debounce is nothing but if you perform certain action, right, those action will give a reaction, correct? So that reaction should happen in some delay. Let's say you are going to set the time for 5000 millisecond, that is going to be of course 5 millisecond, and when you perform certain operation on that, so you are going to get the value, or that specific element is going to emit the event after 5 seconds. So at last overall, if we can say the action will get performed after 5 seconds. That is the concept of debounce. So I'm going to use debounce as well, so that I can show you what exactly it is and how it is working. So then after debounce, I need read only as well, so that we can make this input as a read only. We won't be able to enter any input based on the read only condition. Alright, then of course we need required as well if we are going to use this input inside a form element, right? So if this input is required, of course, then only the form element should be submitted and the respective action should be triggered, or else we are going to say you need to fill this input, otherwise you can't submit that form, right? So here I'm going to add required, and then what else? Okay, one more thing I am going to use here is I'm going to use fill. So this fill is going to be of type outline. Basically I'm going to make this input and design it in the way like it should be, there should be a border all along its, right? Basically we have you can say a small border showing all at all the corner of the input, and then it should be looking good. So we'll see that when we are going to use that. You are obviously you are going to you if you want to modify it, you can modify it in the way you want. If you don't want border, of course you can remove this outline and then you can use something else over here. And how I know this, what we are going to use, I know this, I read the blogs, I read documentation on Vue Ionic, and then only I came to know like, okay, this many props is available on Ion input. So I would recommend you to go and search each one of props, play with each one of props, and then see how it works, right? Now enough talking, let's come back here, and we need all those props here which we defined, right? So very first thing what I'm going to define here is I'm going to define type, right? And type is going to be of type certain types. Of course it is going to be of type string, and then default value will be text. I will just copy it, and then I will define all those props which I have used here. So what else I have used? I have used label, and that is also going to be input, but this time label is not going to be text. I will put empty label over there, so that by default no label should be visible there. It is totally depend on props if we want to show any label. Next I need a prop, not prop but the label position, where exactly label has to place. So for that I'm going to say label, it's going to be label placement or position, I believe. Okay, it's position now. Okay, actually this is how we are going to take data in the props, and then we are going to bind it. But since I have created Ion input first, so I bind all those property first, and then I'm going to define it. You can do in your way. So here again I will remove this, I will copy paste it, and then the label position is going to be default empty. So we'll be passing those label position from outside of this component where we are going to use this. All right, next what we need is, of course, we need a placeholder. So I'll type placeholder and I'll paste it. Placeholder is also going to be by default empty. And then we need counter if we are going to show counter or not. So we can say counter, and this time this is going to be of type boolean, right? Now the default value will change to false because by default we are not going to show any counter, right? We are having couple of more props over here: max length, min length, and disable, right? So I'm going to define all those over here. Max length, right? I'll just copy paste it, but this time this is going to be of type number, and then I'm going to type default value as 0. So now min length will also be the same. I'll just copy all of this and paste it. So this time this is going to be min length, and the min length is going to be 0, right? Next I'm going to use disabled and then read only and required. So I'll just copy paste here. I'll type disabled, and then it is going to be of type boolean, whether we are going to disable the element or not. So this time default, I don't need default 0 here, I need false. By default it should not be disabled, and we should be able to enter some value in the input field, right? So after disable we need couple of more: read only, and then what else we have? Read only and then required, right? So here I will pass on, I will use disabled, read only, and then required, right? So then finally we have input and style class over there, right? Input and style class also will be defining over here. So for that I'll just put input, and then the value is going to be of type string or number. So this is how you are going to define if you're not sure about the value. So you can say like you need a string value as well as number value, either of this you want to use. So in that case you can accept inside the string with the multiple type over there. So by default I'm going to assign empty string, and then we have style class over here, right? So I'll just copy this and I will paste this here, and then of course this is going to be of type, style class is going to be of type string, right? Not a style, but I'm going to define type, and it's going to be of type string, and default value I'm going to assign empty string. Now I'll save it. We have defined all those props which we need, but there's one issue: we should not define it like this. It should be inside the props. I'm sorry, I forgot that, and let's wrap this inside props so that this will be considered as a props value. What I'll do is I'll cut it from here. I'll say props, and again it's going to be an object, and inside that I'll paste. So I'll just format this so that it looks good, right? You can see now we are done with all of these, and then what else we need? We need to add couple of more functionalities in this ion input. We are going to validate certain functionalities, so we'll do that next. Okay guys, finally we have created all those props which we have binded over there in ion input component, right? Now next what I'm going to do here is we need a couple of more functionality over here, and what is that exactly we'll see here. So very first thing what I'm going to say here is, okay, let's first align this properly so that we should be able to see all those props properly. So I'm going to put enter, and then alright, this completely depends on you. This is just optional. I'm just doing it just for seeing it. It should look good and it should be more readable so that we can easily understand what we are going to define here. Alright. So next what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say on input. Alright. What does that mean? Ion input equals to on input. This means in Vuejs we have concept of event. Alright, what is that? Means any input element or element that have capability to emit some kind of event. Alright, since this is going to be input element, so of course it will be emitting those event as well. And now why we are going to use event? Why? Because since we know we are going to pass data from parent to child, right? So parent to child we can pass data using props, we all know that, right? But when it come in the case of from child to parent. In that case, how we are going to send data back to the parent, right? So there this in event comes handy, right? We are going to use event to emit the data, to emit it so that parent can able to listen for that event. So basically what I'm trying to say is when we are going to use this app input component, we are going to register some event listener. There will be an event listener which will be listening for the event, any of the event which will be coming from this input app input. Similarly, in this case, Ion input is emitting a one event whenever we are going to enter some characters or value inside those input element, right? It will emit input, it will emit event, and to detect those event, what we are going to say, we are going to give at the rate, all right, and then we are going to give the event name, all right. So now this Ion input is going to emit one event and the event name is Ion input, and whatever the value getting emitted from this Ion input, we will catch those values here using $event. And how we can do that, we'll see that. But before that, we want to perform certain functionality. Let's say we entered ABC in the text box, right, in the Ion box, Ion input box. Then that input should be captured by its parent. Of course, in this case, app input is the parent, right? Now, if that input has been captured, so based on that input, we want to perform certain operation, correct? So what operation we are going to perform, that we need to bind here. For example, I'm going to bind on input so that we should name it properly so that we can say, okay, this functionality will be related to Ion input. Whenever we type any character or any value inside Ion input, this functionality will get invoked and then we'll be capturing those events, and then finally we'll proceed with that event value and whatever we want based out of that value. So here what I'm going to say is I'm going to pass that event which is coming from this Ion input to this specific function, right? It's very easy, right? Now next thing what I'm going to say is if you guys are having difficulty understanding this, you just write this code, you just play with it, you will get to know how this works. All right, if you face any issues, you just let me know. I will make it more clear. I will make you understand in a very easy way, and I will do that as early as possible. Now here one more thing I'm going to use is I'm going to detect Ion blur event as well. That means whenever you are going to click on this input, right, it will say, okay, input has been touched. That means you somehow clicked on that input. So for that, I'm going to attach one method over here, mark touched, let's say, mark touched, okay. So now there's one difference over here. If you don't want to give or capture explicitly, basically you don't want to explicitly say I'm going to use this $event here. What does dollar means? Dollar means nothing but it is a global instance on view. All right, global means it can be accessed in and from any of the view component file or view pages, right? But before you not before, but if you don't want to use this $event, obviously you can just omit this, but you need to omit this method signature as well. Then what it will do is by default this method this Ion input element is expecting this method should have a parameter by default that is going to accept or capture this event, right? But for the simplicity, I am just going to put that function bracket, right? And here I'm going to pass event so that our code is more declarative, or you can say it's more readable. We should be able to understand it's very easy, right? Now mark touched also, let me leave it as it is, or if you want to detect event here as well, you can detect event here as well, right? Let me just now this you can see here on input and mark touch both are different function, right? and then we need to define this function on this specific component. How we are going to define function, we already know that in the app button component. We are just going to say, let me just close this props from here. We are going to say, okay, we need to define methods. We can have multiple methods, so it is methods here. Then it's going to be an object, since we are going to, we are using options API over here. So everything will be an object, right? It will be very easy to maintain all those, since we are coming from JavaScript background, right? So now here what I'm going to do is I'm going to define on input function, and then it will capture those events. And this is of course a parameter, so you can name it as per you want. But to be more specific or to be more precise, you can define the name which is more suitable, and in this case of course it's event. So next what I'm going to do here is let me just align it. All right. Now here what I'm going to do is I'm going to implement this functionality here on input. What should happen, right? So on input what should happen is, first thing, very first thing what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out this exact value which is getting emitted from on input event, right? What I will do is I will do event dot target dot value. So this event will have a target is your exact element, and then that element will have value. So I'll say value over here, right? Next what I need is I want to check if this input is of type email, right? So I'll just say this dot type. And why I'm going to do that, because let's say you want to validate email, certain email, you don't want to accept all of the email, because as a customer we should be able to give any kind of email, any invalid email also we should be able to give. But that should not the case here. We will validate those email, and then if that email is validated, then only we are going to say, okay, this email is validated, and this is of course a valid data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just check for not text, this time email. And in that case what I will be doing here is I'll say constant, and I'll say is email validated. Fine. Now we need one more function over here to validate email. So for that what I'll do is validate, I'll create one function validate email, and it will accept email, right? Since we are going to validate the email. So now for validating email, what you need is a certain kind of functionality which will check for the email whether that is valid or not. So as of now what I will be doing is I will be just returning true. I will be assuming that email is validated. So or else we can do here is I'll just say email dot includes. All right. And if email dot includes, let's say @ right, that means we are going to say, okay, this is a valid email. So of course we need more robust validation for validation of email, that we will implement later, but for now I'm just going to use this validation. So but before that I will be saying if email not email, if not email, that means we need to return false. That means email is not validated, and then finally we will validate the email, and then of course this function will return a true or false boolean value. So here what I can say, this dot validate email, and then I will be passing that value over here. Once this is done, what I will be doing here is I will now, since we have values, we have captured those events from Ion input, right? But then this input has to be propagated back, not back, but to the app input parent as well. Then only we can perform certain functionality, because this is just a component and we are going to use component everywhere in the program. So for that we all know that to capture the event, not capture but to pass the data from child to parent, we are going to use event, right? And how we can emit the event, for that we have a method defined on view global instance. And how we can access that, of course we know that we can use view global instance using dollar symbol, right? For that what I'm going to say is this dot dollar, and then we have a function emit. So this is function event. Very first thing what I'm going to do is I'm going to say the name of the event, and then an object, the data I'm going to pass. So here I'm going to pass the value, actual value, and then is validated. All right. So I will say is email validated in this case, right? Now there's one more else block will be here, and in this case what I'm going to say is constant data, right? And I will just make an object where I will be just default assigning the value, and then is validated I will be making as default false, means value, no, not default false, I'm going to use true, that means value is by default validated. In case where we don't need validation, or we are just going to provide a plain input, we don't need validation over there. So for that we are going to put is validated true, but still we are going to check for minimum or maximum length if it is there. For that scenario we are going to put one more condition over here. So let's say if this dot, you can say type equals to password. Now in this case we are going to handle the case of password. All right. So for that we need, okay, what we are going to do is we are just going to modify this variable is validated true or false. Of course value will be there, so we need to say is validated, and then here the boolean value should be there. And from where that boolean value should come, of course we are going to create one more method, validate password. All right. Now this is completely optional. If you don't want to do it, you can skip this parts of this video, because we don't need validation and all, but I'm just showing you how we can do that. So instead of, if you want to make it more flexible, right, this app input, if you want validation to be more flexible, what you can do is, instead of defining all those validate method over here, instead of those, what you can do is you can accept that validation method as well in the props. That means whenever you want to use this component, from there only you can pass those validation, or else you can just write one validation method somewhere in the JavaScript file or Vue file, and then you should be able to pass those validation function here, and then it will perform accordingly. This way your code is going to be more flexible, and it should follow the dependency injection, right? So that is how we are going to design it. But for simplicity, what I'm going to do is I would recommend you to use that way as well, and just see how it works. All right. And if you guys successfully achieve that, put down your comments below in the comment section. And if you guys face any issues as well, you can put down your comments, so that I will know at least you are trying to do something new and you want to make it more flexible, right? So next what I'm going to say here is, of course, validate password. Then we need to pass password over here. So I'll say password, and then I will return password. All right, not password, I'll return true. You need to implement the validation here as well. If you won't be able to do it, let me know in the comment section. I will do it for you. Okay, but this is kind of a small challenge for you. You can pause this video and implement those functionality over here and make it work. That will help you to grow in this tutorial. Not in this tutorial, but it will help you throughout your career, or wherever you are working. You will be using these all concepts, and you will be making a very good application, right? So now let me just call this function, this dot validate password, and in that we need value once more, right? So I'll be passing the value. This time it is going to be of password, right? Now the second thing is, I need to check one more thing, if minimum and maximum length is there. So what I'll do is I'll just check for minimum length, right? If it is greater than 0, then that means I need to validate for this. So once more I'll say, not constant, but I'll say data of is validated equals to, I can say this dot a generic method validate. It will simply validate those input based on the condition and all, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to say validate, and then we'll be passing the value, All right. So here what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say I have those value over here, and then I'm going to say this dot $ref dot input. Now in the beginning we saw we have defined ref here, and then how we can access the property or the values of this input element, right? Input component. So for that we are going to use $ref now. Now whenever we put any reference on an element, what it is going to do, it is going to maintain this name for the specific reference, and using it will just register this element on a global instance, on global view instance, where we can access those element using its name, okay, reference name. So in this case it is going to be of value input. So what I will be doing here is I'll just say input and not input, yeah, input. Then I will access the actual element, which is element of course, and then what I'll say is class list. So this element will have a class list. Now from here a plain JavaScript I'm going to use, right? So I'll say remove. What we are going to remove here is we are going to say ion valid. That means input ion input is having one class which is ion valid, and we have one more class ion invalid, which will say whether this input is validated or whether this input is invalid. Just when we'll assign this class, we'll get to know like how it works. So very first I will just remove these two, so that it will neither be validated nor it will be invalid. All right. Then finally we'll process the value. So I'll say if value, not value, but val, or I can say if value equals to empty string, right? In that case, I'm just going to return false. All right. Simple plain JavaScript, we all know that. Now next what I'm going to check is, it's completely depend on you how you want to validate it. But for the simplicity, I'm just putting my thoughts. You are free to use your thought and make it incredible. All right. So next what I'm going to say, I'm going to just convert this value into toString, right? And then I'll put length. If it is less than this dot minimum length, or not value, actually this should be val, it's coming from parameter, or I can say val dot toString dot length greater than this dot max length, and this min length and max length is nothing but it is coming from props. We all know that, right? Now, there's no rocket science over here, simply we are proceeding forward, right? So here what I'm going to say is, if this is the case, that means it breaks the rule of minimum length and the maximum length. In that case what I'm going to return is false, and also I'm going to say input element that you are not validated. How we can say that? We'll just assign ion invalid class to this specific input. So I'll, instead of remove, I'll just add this class. Cool. Now next thing we will be having else part over here. That means all input has been validated successfully according to minimum length, considering the scenario of minimum length as well as maximum length. In that case what I'm going to do is I'm going to say okay, you are validated. All right, here I'm going to return true. Now this value will get assigned here, and then finally what we need to say is, of course we need to emit the value, right? For that I'm going to say this dot $emit, and then we know that how we are going to emit. We'll first define the name of the event, and then we are going to pass data, right? Same thing we did here. So this is how we are going to emit the event. Now one more thing is left here, mark touched, right? So I'll copy it here from here, and then I'll go back here. I'll just define it on the top, and then I'll say event will be coming here, right? Again, if you guys are having any issues, any problem, I keep saying this. Why? Because this might be new for you. It may be difficult for you for understand all this concept at once, but as you proceed in this program, if you're following it properly line by line, you will be able to understand it very clearly, and I will help you guys to understand it more. All right. So here what I'm going to say is, if it is touched means we are going to say, what should we say? Okay, we will just say, not remove, but we'll say just add this class. Not ion invalid, but in this case I'm going to say touched. That means this element has been touched. You have clicked on this element and this element should be focused. Right? I'm going to save it, even though I'm not going to use any event over here. It will be there as it is, or if you want, you can remove it as well. It's completely optional. I'll save it. I'm done with all of the functionality over here. Now this validate function and validate email totally depends on you, how you want to implement this. You can pause this video and you can implement it right now and let me know if it works. All right. So let me save this and we are done with our code over here. Right. It's looking much better now. Simple. Every concept is going to be very simple. We just defined a input element, which is of course of Vue Ionic framework, and then we put all those props which is required here, and from where we are going to assign these props. Again, we are going to take these props from where we are going to use this app input element, basically the parent of the app input element. From there we'll pass all these props, and the same props we are going to bind it here in the ion input. So this is how this wrapper works in Vuejs. Basically you can create your own wrapper. Even if you don't want this ion input to use, you instead of this you can just write plain JavaScript input and then it will work in the same way. But then we don't have this much of functionality over there. We'll have limited functionality since that is native JavaScript element. We need to add a lot of functionality from very scratch and then it will work in the expected way. But we have this UI component ready, so why to invent the wheel again and again, right? We are just going to implement that, and not implement, but we are just going to import that and use it. So now we have registered ion input component over here. We'll summarize it. We have taken all those props, all those values in the props which is required and which is not required. For that we have just marked that default value for that, and then we have defined a couple of methods which will validate the input and then which will also emit the input as per we want. Now one more thing here I want to do, this is the very last thing which I want to do here is, so you can see here we have binded the value and that is coming from the props input, right? So this is, we know this is single way binding. That means whenever this input change, whenever this input prop change, this ion input is going to be changed and it will reflect these values, right? This is called a single way binding. But let's say we want to bind the data in two way, right? How we can bind the data in two way? That means, what does that exactly means? Whenever this ion input is going to be changed, this input should reflect that value. That means if I'm going to enter some input from the keyboard or from anywhere, this input should get the value, exact value of this ion input. So how we are going to do that? Of course, in that case we are going to use two-way binding. This is the concept of single way binding and one way binding and two-way binding. This is a very important concept. Actually, it's an interview question as well, and if you know that, you will have all those flexibility using like how you are going to bind V model. Here comes the concept of V model, that is two-way binding. You can bind the value in two-way. Any one of those values is going to change, it will reflect in both the way. So V model is one of the directive in Vuejs. Using that we can achieve two-way binding. And how we are going to bind that, of course, since we know on each of the input entered, this event we are going to capture, right? Now this event should be propagated back to app input component as well, not component, parent as well, right? So from there we should be able to bind the data in two-way binding. That means we are going to use V model on the parent component of app input, so that we'll be getting the data whenever this ion input changes. And how we are going to do that? of course we are going to use this input. So what we will do is, we'll say, okay, I'm going to emit one more event over here, and here I'm going to assign the name, but this time you just need to update the input. This is going to be mandatory, update should be there for sure, and then after colon you need to give the props name in which those values are coming, right? So in this case, input is the name in which the value is coming, which is getting binded to this input value, right? So what I'm going to show here is, I'm going to use this props name, and then of course we need to emit the value as well, right? And then in this case we are no more going to be emit the object or something. Instead we are just going to say the exact value. We are going to emit the exact value. Now I will save this, and then we are done with this component. How we are going to use that, we'll see that in action after creating a couple of more components, and then finally we'll start creating the login page so that you can know what is happening and why we created this component and what is the benefit of this component actually. All right, so let me go back and create one more file over here, and this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to create one label component. It is going to be very simple. What it will do is, any text which we want to use, right, that has to be wrapped inside label. That means, what does that mean? It means why we are actually creating all these component, because we can centralize all the way of using reusable component, so that if later point of time if we want to change this, we should be able to change at one places and it will change throughout the application, right? And also there's certain concepts, like if you want to perform certain operation, let's say you want to translate the file, right, translate the whole UI text, right? For that it will be very simple if you are using a single component, so that you can write the translation implementation in that component itself, and then it will work for the whole of the application, since you are going to use app label in whole application. This is how it works, and it is more reusable, and it is more effective way of using Vuejs. And this is how the big enterprise application follows, right? So now what I'll do here is I'll just create app label, and then very first thing we know that we need to create a template. So I will just create a template over here. Our design should be there. And then here what I'll say div, right? Okay, now what we are going to do here is we are going to say slot. Okay, now what does slot means, why we are going to use slot, and this is new term we are seeing here, right? What is slot actually? Slot is nothing but, you can say, it is an empty space which you are going to keep here, and then at runtime or when you are going to use this app label, wherever, from there you should be able to inject any of the element inside this slot. That means those elements will get replaced here inside this slot. That is the beauty of this slot. That means basically your component is going to be highly flexible. Any kind of elements, if you want to inject into this slot, you can inject it. So far what we saw is, if we'll go back to input element, we saw that all the data which we want has to come inside the props, right, from the parent to child. But then what about input element? If we want to pass some kind of input element, for example, let's say I want to pass a paragraph, in that case what will happen? How we are going to pass that, right? So for that we have option as a slot here. Slot is one tag in Vue.js. Using that we can put any of the element we want, right? So and the slot can be defined in two ways. One is default slot, which of course we have defined over here, and then second way is we can use named slot as well. So in this case, I will be having only one slot on this component. So we are not going to use name slot, but later in next session or next video, we are going to see how we can use the named slot as well. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use a script tag, and then very first thing what we are going to do is default and then name this component. So name of this component is going to be app label, right? And then I'm going to say style class should also be not here. We are going to define, we need that inside a props. And why actually we are going to take it here, because we should be able to pass these props into this slot. We know the concept of binding data, right, using vbind, and instead of vbind, of course, we can use the colon to bind the data. That is short format of vbind, right? So here what I'm going to say is I'm going to say we need a style class as well, right? It is going to be of type string, right? And then default value is going to be empty, right? And then this is going to be style class, and then we should be able to specify CSS styles as well, raw CSS styles, and for that also we have the type as a string. Again, it's completely depend on you how you want to make it, how you want to modify it, right? This is just my thought which I am writing. If you want to make it more, if you want to make it more enhanced, or you want to make it more flexible, or you want to design it in a different way, you are free to use that and you can make it more robust, right? So for the simplicity of this application, I'm going to follow this way. There's no another way, but of course I'm going to take a very small data so that I can just demonstrate you and make you understand the concept of using slot and the concept of using props, right? So that you will be able to combine all those concepts and make a very robust Vue.js application. So since we know that if we can accept the props, we can bind those props as well. And how we can do that? We can use the colon over here, and then we'll say I'm going to use the same key over here, that is going to a style class, and then I need to bind this style class which is coming inside props. Then we accepted one more, and that is CSS styles, right? So here I'm going to say CSS styles. All right, I'll save it, and then boom, we are done with our app label component, right? There's one more. If you guys are having any problem understanding the slot, you can put down your comment in the comment section, and then I will try to make you understand it more further, and I will do it as early as possible. But meanwhile, I would suggest you to go through this slot. You can go through the Vue documentation how you can use slot, but for the simplicity of the program, you can use like this, and then you can see what is happening here. But we'll understand it in more clear way when we are going to use this component, and we'll see how we can inject the specific element, custom element, or the default native element in place of this slot. So that will get replaced over here, and then boom, it will be working. So now let me create one more component over here, and the name I'm going to use app switch. You might have seen that in your mobile application or maybe on some website, there's toggle button. If you click on this, it will just toggle, and there will be some cool animation so that it will look much better, right? So for that, I'm going to use switch over here, and what I'm going to do is the same thing. First thing first, I'm going to define template, and then here I am going to use ion toggle, and for that we need to import that from Vue Ionic. How we can do that? We know that, but before that we are going to export this component, and we'll name it as name app switch. All right, so now here we need couple of properties, and what are those? We need title, so that we can say, okay, this, what does this means exactly? What does this switch means? There should be some title defining those switch, right? For that, I'm going to say this title is going to be of type string, of course, right? And then the value here, I'm going to give default value. If you don't want, you don't need to pass any value, it's completely optional. And then I will say enable label. All right, enable label, not enable label, but I can say on off label. Okay, so it will just enable a small icon in that switch. Here you will be able to see that when we are going to use this. So I'll say type, this is going to be of type boolean. So we can say just make it enable or make it disable. So for that, I'm going to say by default show it. If someone wants to disable it, they need to say explicitly disable this on off. All right, now we need one more thing checked so that we can be able to pass a default value, and then it will be by default on or off. So then again type is going to be boolean, and then here default value is going to be false. By default the switch will be off, right? And then we have one more property over here. I'll just copy it and I will use disabled. Fine. So it is also going to be false by default. Now we need component as well, right? And that is from where we are going to import. We are going to import from Ion toggle. That will be coming from Ionic view. All right, and this is the way we are going to register all those components on this app switch, and then I'm going to use that component over here. How we can use that? Of course, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use it in the toggle case. Again, this naming convention is there, even though you can see here I have imported this in the format of Pascal casing, but I'm using it in the kebab casing. So this is how, this is just a recommended way of using component. If you'll go and read across the documents of Vuejs, documentation of Vuejs, but you are free to use any of the cases, and you will able to see if you are able to use that specific format or casing or not. So you are free to play with that. I would recommend you to go and play with that. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to use toggle, right? And then I'm going to put title over here. So title will get appended inside this toggle, and then a couple of property which I want to assign it, or I want to bind it here. First thing is going to be of course checked, which will get binded to checked. And how we can do that? We can do that like this. All right, and then of course we need disabled as well, right? So disabled also we are going to bind, which we are taking it from props, and then finally on off label. So it is going to be enable on off label. How we know that? You may be surprised how I know this all props, right? And I'm simply writing it. So for knowing this, you just need to read the documentation of Vue Ionic, and you need to go through all those UI components, and from there you can learn this. And this is completely concept of, this is completely a practice. If you will remember it on fingertips, your hand will just run on the keyboard, right? So that's what I'm doing. I would recommend you to do the same way, and that way you will be able to learn it very easily, and you will remember it for long. So I'll just save it, and we are done with the app switch component. So now guys, in this video we have created 3 different components, that is app input, app label, and app switch. We are going to use this component in the login page, and how we are going to design the login page we'll see in the upcoming videos. We'll design cool login page, and then we'll put some color on those page, and finally we'll create header and all. We'll see that in action in the upcoming videos. But for now, we learned how to create an app component from scratch. What is importance of creating component from scratch, right? Even though you can import a third-party component and then you can design, you don't have to design it, you just need to import that and use it, right? But what if there's any bug in that component? So this is the way you are going to define your own component, own wrapper, and then you can use it easily. and this will be in your hand. If you find any bug, you can fix that easily instead of waiting for that specific component to fix the bug, right? So this will make your code more reusable, more robust, and your application will be very highly flexible. All right guys, so if you like this video, you can click on like button below, and then if you have any issue, of course you can put anytime, you can put your doubts or issues in the comment section. I will try to address all those as early as possible. Thank you guys, we'll meet in the next video.